much, but... But if I have to shoot that, how wet that was.
Well, hello there.
Hello.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to talk about the 16-inch rifle barrel length. It's about time. It's been 7 months. The boring legal barrel length that, despite its demonstrable effectiveness, is met with boos, eye rolls, hisses, and teeth sucking.
Your boos mean nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer.
The milquetoast barrel length that is so boringly reliable and consistent. It gets ignored like a dedicated spouse. With capability and ease of accuracy, it takes the fun out of it.
I just got bored. Everybody out.
Proportions so good it lasts longer, and parts breakages are so infrequent. It frustrates people, I guess. The barrel length's so good, you can almost point randomly at stocked gun racks in a gun store full of different brands of 16-inch ARs and say that one. The barrel length that pays its bills, has a stable job, and will text you back. It's now time to talk about the 16-inch AR15. As per usual, I've got pros, middle ground, and cons of the 16-inch barrel length. I've got 8 pros, 4 middle ground, and 8 cons. We're doing a factor of 4 this time. So let's tackle the pros of the 16-inch barrel. First, lots of quality options with proven track records, because 16-inch is hard to make a bad choice, but people still do somehow. Lots of quality manufacturers have really tested and perfected their 16-inch barrel lengths, and we've seen an evolution in gas system lengths that really lend themselves to the 16-inch barreled platforms. It's really hard in AR-15s to get a bad 16-inch, but it can still happen. Some people make poor decisions.
All right, Morty, pack your shit. That's only gonna keep them down for a little bit, Morty. You f***ed with squirrels, Morty. We got a good 5 minutes before they're backing up on our ass, Morty.
Number 2, solid velocity. We all know that 20-inch is what the 5.56 was designed for originally. But with advances in bullet design, technology, and powder development, with a quality load and a 1-in-7 or 1-in-8 twist, you're gonna get superior velocity, especially if you wanna push them into a precision application. You pair a 1-in-7 or 1-in-8 twist in a 16-inch barrel with a heavy bullet, say 69 grain to 77 grain, and you win. Number 3, gas system lengths are the most diverse and effective in the 16-inch barrels. You have carbine length, boo. Carbine length is not ideal. You also have mid-length, intermediate length, which is Knight's Armament or Geisley. It's a little bit longer than mid-length, but not quite rifle length. And you also have rifle length if you want to play around with a dissipator build. Good luck though, because I think only Criterion makes a proper dissipator. Some guys chop a 20-inch and drill the gas port a little larger, but Criterion seems to have it down pat, and I might build one day, we'll see. But mid-length, intermediate length, and the rifle length options are going to give you some of the smoothest shooting experiences you will ever have. Remarkably excellent. And from that point, we're going to say smooth shooters. Almost every 16-inch I've picked up, even if it's a carbine length, tends to be a smooth shooter if you've properly sprung and buffered it based on whether you use an A5 or a carbine length. There's definitely a lot of options out there, and it's very easy to tune the performance and recoil impulse of a 16-inch barreled AR15 to the point where sometimes just a muzzle device change or just changing the spring, not necessarily the buffer weight, will dial it in perfectly, the least amount of inputs to get it running properly. And I hate to say it, even PSA 16-inch builds, this is my buddy's, and it shoots pretty nice.
There's only 3 forges, bro. You know what? That actually shoots really flat. Flat and smooth. Not too bad.
Please understand that hurt me deeply to admit. Number 5, they're more reliable. 16-inch guns tend to have a lot less stress on the system as a whole because the dwell time and lock time and all those things are properly balanced. So you're not dealing with the lack of dwell time increasing the pressures internally. With the better dwell time and lock time and all that other stuff, your bolt and bolt carrier are much less stressed, especially with a mid-length, intermediate length, or rifle length gas system. Your internal parts are going to have much better longevity, and quite frankly, it's an easy system to maintain. They don't get as filthy. It's just overall a better system for a lot of reasons. And if you're looking for a barrel length that gives you a lot and doesn't compromise internal parts wear, 16-inch is very easy to recommend because it's just so well dialed in and the stress on everything is much less. Number 6, they're easy to get hits with. Every 16-inch I've used to date feels a lot easier versus shorter barrel lengths to get hits with at distance. Sure, you can go to a 100-yard range and feel superior with damn near anything you put in your hands. When you start stretching past even 200 yards, you start going 300, 400, 500 yards, you really start to feel the limitations of the shorter barrels. The 16-inch barrels, though, I don't really have that experience, and I feel much more capable and accurate with a 16-inch. Especially with this HK, it's a lot less difficult to hit things I'm aiming at with this setup because the barrel is so excellent. The heavy profile barrel, 16.5 inches, really just gives me all of the velocity and stabilization that I need to reach out to distance and smack stuff that I'm aiming at. And trust me, for someone like me who's really not that skilled, it helps. I'll definitely take all the help I can get. Number 7 on our list is it's a great starting point and it's legal from the get-go. A lot of guys look at these and say, if I have to have a 16-inch barrel anyway with the 14.5, why not just maximize the 16-inch barrel and get a 16-inch barrel and a smaller muzzle device? So yeah, I'm at 16.5 inches, but so is my 14.5 with a pin and welded device that I'm stuck with. And it's also easy to start learning how to build 16-inch AR-15s, tune them, all sorts of stuff, all the reasons that I mentioned before already. A 16-inch gun is a great starting place and it teaches you a lot. It also gives you that reliable platform you can grow with. All these points really just lend themselves to the 16-inch barrel being a great starting point for someone getting into AR-15s. And once you've learned and developed your skills, the 16-inch really becomes something you can use effectively, especially in open areas or longer ranges or things like that. And you don't have to pin and weld your muzzle device, which is solid. Number 8. The last point in the pros column, They are excellent suppressed, and they're not as loud as shorter barreled rifles or pistols when they're unsuppressed. So yes, an unsuppressed gunshot is loud, but when you start shortening your barrel, especially when you're discussing a high velocity round like the 5.56, when you start shortening the barrel, you're gonna get a lot louder, a lot faster. The 16-inch, again, by no means is quiet. It's not like a 16-inch barreled 45 ACP where it almost sounds suppressed. You're still cooking. It's still making a lot of noise, but you can really pick out a shorter barreled 5.56 like 10.3 to about 11.5, 12.5 versus a 16. 16-inch guns sound like a normal gunshot from a rifle, which I know sounds weird, but the more I shoot around people with different barrel lengths, especially all these guys that like the short barrel lengths, they switch to, or I start running my 16-inch guns, it becomes almost pleasant, which is nice. I mean, obviously I'm still wearing ear pro, but 16-inch does a lot. And then couple that with a suppressor, it gets much quieter. So when you're shooting a 16-inch gun with a suppressor, it sounds a lot better than a 11.5 with a suppressor. So definitely some very healthy and solid pros for the 16-inch barrel. Let's dive into the middle ground. Now, for those that haven't watched my other videos on rifle barrel lengths, middle ground is kind of a take it or leave it sort of thing. Weight is extremely subjective. A 16-inch barrel gun, especially my MR556 in front of you, gets really chonky really fast when you start changing the rails out, adding accessories. It puts you potentially outside of your comfort zone. I've been able to run this gun pretty well, and it weighs, with the HK steel mag full of 77 grain TMKs, 13 pounds. It's a little lighter with P mags, but really a 13-pound rifle is a lot. I'm able to run that because I lift a little bit and I just force myself to do it. But if you have a gun that starts lighter, like an SR15, you can outfit it and still stay kind of light and optimized, but you really have to be conscious of what you're putting on your gun with a 16-inch versus the shorter barrel guns that can stay lighter easier. The next one is going to be maneuverability. It's about the same as a 14.5. The 14.5 feels lighter, but realistically it's the same as a 14.5. I've run them pretty frequently, and with the 14.5 having the same length with a muzzle device, my URGI I think is like 16.4, 16.5 inches with a 4-prong. I have to measure it again. But when you're in that range, and with the muzzle device on my MR556, it's 17 inches. So once you're in that range, it's about the same as a 14.5. You're really splitting hairs. Unless you put a suppressor on it, then the suppressor's further out. So unless you're running a can, and good luck if you are, but it's going to be about the same. So it's not the best, not the worst for close quarter combat. It's remarkably average, which for some people is, unacceptable. But realistically, if you want to do it all rifle, you're sticking with 14.5 or 16-inch anyway. Think about it. And as always, your dimensions will dictate if it's good or not for you. A taller person running a 16-inch is going to be like somebody running a 12.5. You know, they're longer. It's going to feel more comfortable for them. And if you're shorter stature, you're going to have a little harder time, especially if you don't have an adjustable buttstock, running a 16-inch. Now, I know a guy who's shorter than me. I know you didn't think that was possible, but he runs an Arrow 16-inch and he makes it look easy. I mean, you can tell he's a shorter guy. We call him the Battle Gnome. But he runs it very, very well and very flat and smoothly. He drives it like a man. So running a 16-inch, stature dependent, I guess, but realistically, you can do it if you decide to and put solid effort into it. Lastly, number 4, you're going to have a long sight radius for irons for the few people that run guns like that still and care, which is not really that many people. I know some people give me shit for leaving my irons on my guns with LPVOs. All of my irons are zeroed for the round that the gun uses. The Troy irons on my MR556 are zeroed for 50-200 for 77 grain TMK. Same thing with the rifle above, it's zeroed for 77 grain TMK because that's the diet it's going to have with the Knight's micro sights. So for those of us that are out there that want to have an effective rifle but don't trust anything with glass or power, those people still exist. The iron sights on your 16-inch barrel with a 15-inch rail are really going to be optimized versus, say, a 14.5 or anything shorter. But again, that's very situationally dependent and for the people that want to run those. Cons, there are 8 of them. Number 1, running just a dot on a 16-inch feels dumb. There's lots of real estate and capability on a 16-inch, so the rails are typically longer and you're going to feel stretched out on it. It's more of a psychological thing. Like, yes, the rail is physically longer than a 14.5, but the overall package just feels longer. And if you don't outfit it properly for the perceived dimensions, it's going to feel awkward, and that happens sometimes. And I've run a 16-inch with a dot on it and did fine. The SR15 with a Comp M5 is a wonderful little shooter. But with that setup, you're really not even beginning to tap into the potential of that 16-inch barrel, so it feels almost out of place, even though it's a good setup. Or you can jump to, if you want to stay lighter, I shot this guy's BCM 16-inch with an ACOG on it. It was the Recce version, and it was pretty nice. So there's ways to get good performance out of a 16-inch barrel and not weigh it down, so you still stay pretty balanced with it. But when you're just throwing a dot on it, it does feel like a waste, if you're being honest with yourself. And number 2, which kind of expands on the previous point but is different, the capabilities of a 16-inch cry for it to be typecast into an SPR or larger magnification optics, or what I'm going to talk about later, which is a GPR. But it really cries to have either a 1 to 8 on it, a 1 to 10, a 2.5 to 10, a 2 to 10, a 3 to 15, 3 to 18, 4 to 16. Because once you see the accuracy capabilities it has, you're kind of like, I might as well maximize that and go full bore down there. But then it typecasts it. And there are dudes that, despite my criticism earlier, run just dots on their 16-inch guns and love it. So there's always that stigma like, hey, if you're going to run the 16-inch gun, it's only good at this, when it's good at whatever you use it for, but at the same time, it really does cry for those increased magnification ranges so you can push it out and maximize your capability. So adding a normal length suppressor like an RC2 or a CAC QDC is really going to make this thing long. It's essentially a boat paddle, which, if we're being honest, won't bother the Mark 12 enthusiasts, but for regular dudes, it's going to be too long. Like, I think it's 20 or 21 inches when I put the RC2 on there. It's pretty crazy. Number 4, they feel longer than they are. And again, it's more of a psychological aspect, but the more people that are around my height that run them, they're like, wow, this feels too long, man, I don't know. And the more CQC you do, the less that matters. You'll start to feel that it's not that long. But unfortunately, human beings have difficulties breaking psychological barriers for a lot of reasons, and we're creatures of habit. So if you start running shorter barrel guns, you're like, wow, this is so much better, and you get excited, and that dopamine release. Going to a 16-inch feels like you're being punished, or it's too long to do anything with, or anything like that. It becomes a relativism sort of thing, and you get a mental block running a 16-inch in any sort of CQC capacity, and it gets annoying. But once you realize, oh, it's more of a perception thing versus a length thing, especially with a 14.5 right next to it, it's not going to prevent you from doing anything. But again, mental blocks are real things. So if you can't drop that mental block, this is definitely going to be a detractor for you and a sticking point. Number 5, few 15-inch rails out there until recently. 16-inch barrel rifles look dumb with short rails, and even this one is a 14.5 inch, and it leaves a lot of barrel exposed. And this is a 16.5 inch barrel, and Geisley made a Mark 15 rail but didn't stretch it out to cover it, for probably 2 reasons. One, it's going to put more weight out here, and most people aren't going to use that real estate anyway, unless you're just using iron sights. But it's very rare to get a 15-inch rail, and then it becomes, is it too thin, or is it now too thick and heavy? A lot of guys like those Hodge rails, which are really Zev rails. Uh-oh, that truth is going to bring some dislikes.
Your booze mean nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer.
But it's a nice thick rail, very robust. I love the tri-lock system, but damn is it heavy the second you start stretching it out. This is about the right thickness, but it is heavy, and this is the rail to use on an MR556, but it does get heavy. This Mark 13 rail is a little thin, and the Mark 16 rails, most rails, I'm going to tell you right now, most M-LOK rails, they go for weight nowadays because most people aren't going to be doing combat stuff with it. So the companies are like, yeah, we'll make it longer, but it's going to be a little thinner. Unless you're running a Knights URX rail. The URX 4 rail is probably the best balance with Knights. It's thick enough to be hard use, but thin enough where it's not adding weight like this does. But it's really user preference, and then it becomes, will my user preference fit my application, which is something that people struggle with. There's massively inflated personal senses of what people are going to be doing, and then there's practical application, which stares them in the face every day, but they ignore. It becomes a potentially self-defeating enterprise where they start making their 16-inch more robust, but then it becomes too heavy to use for them. And again, weight is subjective, but it becomes too heavy for them to use, so they don't use it anymore.
And now we're back to How Did I Get Here? The only show that makes you ask yourself, how did I get here?
And then there's these other guys that are like, I want the lightest rifle out there, because they don't work out. And then it becomes so fragile that they don't want to use it hard. So again, their 16-inch barrel is staying in the safe. And it's really difficult to find that nice balance, or just man up and run the heavy rifle. Number 6, it's easy to get nose heavy and the weight is further out. I know I just talked about weight for a while, but if you start hanging the lights where you need to with the muzzle and your mauls or D-balls or whatever up front, and then you got all the switches and everything, that's all further forward. And throw a can on there and you're done. So unless you have a bipod and run this thing like an SPR, then you're really starting to get nose heavy and you have to drive it harder. So it becomes a should I, shouldn't I situation versus just doing it like you would with shorter barrel lengths. So once again, your 16-inch is collecting dust in your safe. Number 7, it's not a short boy. I know I just kind of hit on this twice. But the community is really focused around how short can I go and still stay effective. And again, that effectiveness is based on these wildly subjective situations that people paint themselves in versus what's actually practical. And the going as short as possible, the 10-3 guys are kind of dying out. It's more 11-5, 12-5 now. And those guys are still really in the camp where I'm going to optimize my 11.5 and 12.5, and I have them too, but I'm going to try to optimize my 11.5, 12.5 to do as much as I possibly can with it instead of just running the 16-inch barrel. And it becomes, guys are going to SPR matches with these short guns. Some people can really, really shoot well and they dominate, but it's a very small percentage of people. A lot of guys will be like, I can make hits at 500 with my 8.3 inch. Yeah, okay. How many shots did it take for you to get there, and how much easier is it with a 16-inch barrel? But again, short boy syndrome has really taken the gun community over, and there are a bunch of guys with just short barrel guns and no long barrel guns whatsoever. So it kind of sets up this mentality where they want to justify certain things are good for everything, but realistically you can take a 16-inch out and dominate with it. But again, you're looking at a heavier gun, it's longer, and it's not that short boy that everybody's built themselves up to love. And then lastly, number 8, building off of that, is user expectations versus stupid gun community stigma takes one of the best barrel lengths off the table for a lot of people. There's a lot of guys that are just like, oh, that 16 inch it's too long to do anything good with. You know, unless you're bench rest shooting, a 16 inch is dumb. It's not. And I think if more people found themselves in combat environments where it's like Afghanistan and you have to shoot more than 300 yards, or there's varying terrain or winds or crosswinds, or you're shooting from peak to peak and your bullet has to go through the wind tunnel that is the valley, it becomes an exercise in futility trying to have these discussions with people. And it's not that I'm a 16-inch guy and 16 inches are better than everything for everything and you can't convince me otherwise, but it's fucking math.
Now listen, I know the two of you are very different from each other in a lot of ways, but you have to understand that as far as Grandpa's concerned, you're both pieces of shit. Yeah, I can prove it mathematically. Actually, let me grab my whiteboard. This has been a long time coming anyway. So in conclusion, you're both equally mercurial, overly sensitive, clingy, hysterical bird brain homunculi. And I honestly can't even tell the two of you apart half the time because I don't go by height or age, I go by amount of pain in my ass.
Yeah, like these guys just will not respond to math. They're like, well, I don't need that extra velocity. Do you want to vibe check anybody? Whoa, I'll just aim for the head. You're going to aim for the head with an 11-inch at 300 yards? Good luck, buddy. You know, like it's doable, but how much harder do you have to work? And there's a lot of guys that'll just talk people that would be better suited with a 16-inch because of their skill set or the way they shoot or any of these things, or they live in the middle of the country, or they live in areas like Arizona or Colorado or Nevada or whatever, where these vast open spaces or varying terrain where your engagements are going to be way further out should they happen. A 16-inch is much better suited for that, or longer, honestly, but it comes down to people talking people out of things versus actual practical application and testing these systems out and trying to fit them to your situation versus fitting your preference and your bullshit to what you think the situation is going to be or what you're only going to be doing when you have zero experience in that arena, myself included. You got to think like, what is actually going to be effective versus what would I prefer to use? I mean, nobody wants to do anything hard. I love just sitting in an air-conditioned space and chilling, just like everybody else. Nobody wants to be out in 110-degree weather taking fire. So that wraps up the pros, the middle ground, and the cons. Let's talk about brand recommendations. I'm going to split it up into bought versus built. So for your brand recommendations, I've got your minimum entry level. That doesn't necessarily mean the company is minimum entry level, but for me, with my standards, using these rifles in a potentially serious situation, you need at least this grade of rifle to survive and do well. I'm going to start minimum to maximum in each category. For your minimum quality rifle, bare minimum quality for me is Aero Precision, Fabrique Nationale FN, or BCM is the top of my minimum scale. They're usually cold hammer forged, have chrome lined barrels. Their barrels are not trash. I don't like Aero rails, and with Aero comes Ballistic Advantage. Ballistic Advantage builds complete rifles. This rifle here is a Aero M4E1 receiver set that I put together with a Ballistic Advantage 16-inch Hansen profile with a mid-length gas system. When you're looking at Aero, don't get their dumbass rails. I think their rails are trash. You can get a nice receiver set and then put it together, or buy an Aero complete rifle and then change the rail out if you can, based on which one you get. I would definitely push you towards the Ballistic Advantage portion, but I've shot more than a few 16-inch Aero precision rifles and they shoot very well. I've been very happy with their accuracy and their performance. FN makes a good standard rifle, and most of the M4s I've carried on duty are FNs and they shoot pretty straight. I know those are 14.5-inch guns, but the 16-inch barrels they make are really solid, and other companies I'm about to mention here in a minute use them. And then BCM makes good duty quality level stuff. All right, next for middle class or upper middle class, Daniel Defense, Centurion, Noveske, and Geisley. It's really splitting hairs between those guys. I put Daniel Defense first because they're good and they're duty quality, but I really think Geisley, Centurion, and Noveske are doing a better job with certain things. But Daniel Defense is pretty good performance. A Centurion gun, by the way, may not be much to look at, but that retired Navy SEAL chief really knows what he's doing, and a lot of people sleep on Centurion. They use FN barrels and he does like special stuff to them, and the accuracy out of Centurion, like just go watch Mr. Guns and Gear video on some of the Centurions. They have stupidly awesome accuracy out of those guns, and some guys don't like them because of how the finish looks or whatever, but it is a rock solid performer. I highly recommend Centurion, and I'm going to be doing some stuff with some Centurions in the future. All right, and then my top tier is LMT, HK, and Knights Armament. You really can't go wrong with those. You already knew those were my top tier. I know some people are going to ask me about Radian and LaRue and all these other brands that I didn't mention. Probably, but I haven't shot them. I know people are going to ask why no Triarch, because people have conceived and had children before their orders come through, and I really just need Triarch to get their shit together, and they still haven't. So I'm not going to recommend Triarch until they have their shit together and start acting right. Great rifles. Very, very solid performing rifles and excellent build quality. Their company just cannot get it together though. Now, if you're building it, what barrels do I recommend? Because that's something that comes up a lot. Barrels are going to be Criterion, Ballistic Advantage Hansen profiles. Centurion makes stellar barrels. Geisley used to sell barrels, but just understand that their barrels are intermediate length, not mid-length. Daniel Defense barrels are pretty solid. All right, set up like I did with the Short Boys. I'm trying to pick up the pace here. I know this is a long video. There's a great article I recommend from the great Frank Woods. He wrote it for Gun Mag Warehouse. I'm gonna link it below. I'm gonna do a separate video on the concepts in that article, because I think repurposing a lot of these things is smart, because the term recce came out when that sort of concept wasn't in existence. Things have really evolved since then, and I think the way he classifies each rifle and setup is pretty smart, especially for the gun community. But 16-inch rifles are great for GPRs, which is a general purpose rifle, a mid to high power LPVO. The mid power is about 1 to 6, and a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 6. I know there's some law enforcement officers that are limited to 1 to 5s. And then your high power LPVOs are 1 to 8 to 1 to 10. Those will optimize your performance. And there's a lot of good options in the 1 to 8 and 1 to 10 categories. Or SPR, which is a special purpose rifle. And that's going to be a scope, a legit scope, like a 2 to 10, 2.5 to 10, 3 to 15, 4 to 16, 3 to 18, something like that. A bipod, a Geisley SSA or SSAE trigger, and a can. That's really going to optimize performance and give you some stellar results. It's going to be heavy though, but you can either lie to yourself like I did, or get an SR15 and just put a dot on it, or you can lean into the fact that these guns are going to be heavier, like this one will be when it's done. It's getting all those things I just talked about, a scope, a bipod, all that stuff. Just really push these things out to the distance that they're capable of running with high quality ammunition. Good luck finding it.
Isotope 322. This stuff's so powerful, Morty. It makes Isotope 465 look like Isotope 317.
I've done both. So you choose your path, you choose your own adventure, and you do what's best for you. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying from my experience so far, that's where I've seen the best performance for me. Might be the same for you, might not. I don't know. In closing, 16-inch will always be the milquetoast, missionary position, boring barrel length to the gun community. Despite how hard 16-inch fucks with velocity, accuracy, and ease of use. The more you use the 16-inch, the more it demonstrates she's more like a hot MILF that does everything you could ever want when you're honest with yourself at the end of the day. Like Bridget B, or Lisa Ann, or Ava Adams, you know, you get it. They're not out of shape, they're just thicker and more well-rounded. They'll never be those petite ladies you can just pick up easily and throw around. I can tell you more often than not, I've always been like, man, I really wish I had my HK today, because it's a nice clear day and I've got some more distance to shoot, and I really wish I brought my HK instead of these shorter barreled guns. Especially open area environments, 16 inches at a minimum. But as always, it's up to you. Thanks for watching. Take care out there.
Okay, but not because you told me to.
Summer! Okay, getting dark.